It's been an amazing last year and a half here at the Broward Church. The special offering almost feels a bit like a kickoff for us again of our year. And really, our church family has been a part of some amazing things that God is doing through us. Over the last 16 months, our church has grown. Our family has grown in size. Many people have found faith in Jesus, have repented of their sins and been baptized, and that's an amazing thing. We've seen growth over week in our offering and our giving. We've seen our attendance here at the building on Sunday mornings increase. And more importantly than all those kind of facts, we've seen people growing closer and closer to God. People who have decided to give their whole life to Jesus. I've heard of stories of people who this year have decided to recommit their lives to Christ. They were wandering in their faith and just decided to make a turn for the better. I've heard brothers and sisters share with me about their marriages and how they decided this year to reconcile their marriages. People are baptizing their friends and their spouses and their children, and we celebrate these things. We celebrate the fact that we are in community groups, and those groups are growing and becoming more and more dynamic. People have found a home in the church in our small groups. We celebrate a renewal in our passion for discipleship and people being in one another's lives and in the mission. And this stuff is amazing. This last year, we invested in our social media presence. And each week now, we have thousands of people viewing our videos and our posts and sharing them. And it's super, super, super cool. And we have about every Sunday between 20 and 50 people watching us online. And so, if you are here today, I would like you to make a lot of noise for everybody who is watching us on Facebook. Hello, Facebook family. One of our sisters was baptized here in the Broward Church and moved away with her husband because they found a new job. And her husband doesn't attend the church, but she was trying to be connected with the family. And so she wanted to attend a local church. So she did that. But each week she decides after she's finished to come home and tune in to our services. And so she's part of us, but she's also part of them. Our live stream has allowed us to connect with brothers and sisters who are sick, who are home because they can't be here, but they can be with their family. And we have a very special hello for Donna Fowler. She's watching us online, but she's going through chemotherapy. And it happens to also be, I think, her birthday. And so we're going to do a happy birthday to you for Donna online. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Donna, dear Donna. Happy birthday to you. Amen. This year's been really cool. I love seeing the work done in the building. Since January of last year, we have redone the baptistry, and we've added some cool lights, and we've added some sound, and you got new chairs that you're sitting on. And be praying, because maybe we'll change the bathrooms, which will be awesome. Because we've believed in this is to be our second home. And anyway, God has done so many really, really cool things. I want to also thank our administration, our board of directors this past year, navigating the challenges of change and also being above reproach in the way in which we handle our finances. The people on our board of directors and the people in our administrative staff deserve a huge, huge round of applause. This year, we've also seen some new projects for the poor. Being a church and not for ourselves has become a reality for us. We have done every year over the past couple of years a Hope Golf Tournament, and that's been amazing. That was, year over year, we've raised over $100,000 for people in Bolivia, in a hospital in Bolivia. But the last 2 years, we added the Walk for Kids, which has raised $30,000 for the modern-day orphans. We've done our Christmas Give Back Midweek, which we've given gifts out to more than 150 kids who are desperately poor. And this year, we're also getting to partner with Marcia Brevet as she serves the orphans in Jamaica. This stuff is so encouraging and so exciting. This year, as John and Pat mentioned, last year we got to send out some missionaries to Brazil, some young, fired up missionaries to the great city of Sao Paulo. And also, this year, I'm just trying to give you a list of things we've done. We also were able to appoint Monte and Marcy Strickland as elders here in the staff. It's a great joy to be a part of this church. It's a great joy, and I'm proud of the fact that I'm a part of this congregation. I'm thankful that God has chosen us to be a part of this great work. You know, if I could pick any weekend for a first-time visitor to come to service, it would be this weekend. Not because I want anything from you, please. It's not because, there's more people here, so give more offering. That's not it at all. As a matter of fact, if you're visiting with us, I want you to feel zero obligation to give, please. But today illustrates what our church family is all about. See, we are a people dedicated to the mission of God. We are a people dedicated to helping people who are far from God be reconciled to Him. And not everybody's going to give today, but today launches a season of sacrifice in the church, a season of generosity. It's a season where we pour out in order to save some. It's a time where we, through our profound enjoyment for God's grace and our profound love for how much He has done for us, we decide to pour out in rich generosity. Some people have designated for their special offering a large amount of funds, and others have designated a little bit. But we know that in God's economy, the amount is always secondary to the sacrifice. Whether it's a lot or a little, it doesn't really matter. What God cares about is our heart. And what we're going to do today is kind of circle around this point of sacrifice. I'm going to preach a message, and then we've given some time for us to collect our special offering. But if you could you turn with me to Mark chapter 14 as we circle the idea of sacrifice. Mark chapter 14, we're going to begin in verse 1. Again, if you're visiting with us today, I know this can feel a little bit like a family reunion. People are like shaking their hands and dancing, and you're like, people are raising their hands. Is someone holding a gun to them? This is a family day, and I know it could feel a bit like a reunion, but I don't want you to feel obligated to give the way that our members would give or any of that. I just want you to maybe get a snapshot at why we give. So if you're here for the first time, today, again, is just to give you a little picture of the reason in which we give. We're going to begin again in Mark chapter 14, beginning in verse 1. It says, "Now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away. And the chief priest and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or people will riot." That's the setting, and here's the story. While he, that's Jesus, was in Bethany reclining at a table in the home, while he was reclining at a home of Simon the leper. That's this guy's name. This guy's name is Simon the leper, which is a terrible nickname. He's a man who we don't know much about except that he at some point had leprosy, and now he was healed. But notice that he was known by what he once was. He was a leper. He isn't anymore. We know that he isn't anymore because they wouldn't be in his house if he was a leper. Lepers were outcast in society. They were social rejects. Likely then, this man had been healed by Jesus at some point, and so is now hosting a party in his honor. And I know I joked about his name, but I love that that's his name because it reminds me that though our past doesn't define us, it does serve as a great illustration or reminder of where we once were. And we're going to see this play out a little bit more in this passage. So Simon hosts this party, and he's showing gratitude to them, and people are showing up. And in verse 3, the story continues. It says, "A woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, 'Why this waste?'" This woman breaks into the party. In Mark's account, we don't know anything else except that she's a woman. We don't know her name. Well, all we know is that she pours into this party and then pours some perfume on Jesus' head. And while she's doing that, some of the people who are following Jesus, some of the folks at the party are like, "Why this waste?" Basically, they're saying, I don't get it. Why would anybody do this? Verse 5. "It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor. And they rebuked her harshly." Verse 6. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing." Verse 7. "The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them at any time you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. And here we are, 2018, 2,000 years later, and we're still telling this woman's story. The scent of her sacrifice is still in the air. You know, it's interesting to me, when I was reading this passage, all my life, pretty much, I typically take the woman's side. I go, woman, that makes sense what you're doing. I totally understand that. And I kind of rebuke the disciples or those who are following Jesus. I go, these guys didn't really get it. But the more I studied this passage out and the more I looked at the context and the more I understood what she was doing, the more I realized that I could relate to the disciples more than I actually wanted to. Just think about it. The guests of the party are sitting down for dinner, and here comes this crazy woman. She busts into a party that maybe she wasn't even invited to, and she starts pouring perfume on the main guest's head. And this is expensive stuff. The Bible says it's more than a year's wages. Broward County average salary is about $45,000 a year. So let's call it $50,000 a year. Let's call it $50,000, which means that this isn't some perfume that you buy at CVS when you forgot your mom's birthday. You know what I'm saying? The one that they keep in those boxes and you throw in the stocking stuffer. Yeah, this isn't one of those stuff. This is like top shelf. I don't know how you calculate expensiveness of perfume. But anyway, this is pure nard. Matthew Henry says it was from the Himalayan mountains. Like somebody had to go to Nepal, dig out a root, extract a fragrance from it, put it in a vase, and then bring it thousands of miles to Israel. And here this lady is breaking the vase and pouring it over this guy's head. And most of it fell to the floor. Why this waste? When I think of it like that, I don't really blame the disciples, because if I was there, I would be like, what in the world are you doing, woman? They understood the cost, and for them, it was a waste. And what we see here, I love this story because we see really two sets of characters. We see one set of character who is this woman who is trying to have some incredible faith and do something amazing for God and pour on Jesus something that's worth more than she will ever probably even make in her lifetime. And you have these people who are sitting back calculating. She's sacrificing and they are calculating. And I love this because it reminds me of the battle that rages within me when I try to do something radical for God. Anytime you try to do something sacrificial for God, there is a voice in the back of your head that goes, what am I doing? Let me think. I could use this money. I can use this time. I can use these resources and do this. There's a moment where you start calculating. We take up a special offering every year. And it's 10 times what you might give on a Sunday. Think about what you could do with that money. Think about that. Like you could buy a car, some of you. And for you, some of you, you're like, it doesn't, on the logical side of your mind, it makes no sense at all. It makes no sense to sacrifice this. You're sacrificing a vacation. You're sacrificing something nice. You're sacrificing taking your wife out on a nice date. You're sacrificing, using that money to buy a video game, campus students, or to do whatever. You're sacrificing, and you think this doesn't make any sense. I remember the very first time I gave an offering by check. I wrote the check, and it was my first real paycheck I had ever received in my whole life, and I was excited. I don't know, it was like $150, But I was excited about it, and I came, and I decided that I was going to give 50% of my money to the church. God had given me a job, and I was excited about it. And so I sat down, I wrote the check, and as the trays were being passed, I threw in my check. And I'm ashamed of this story. And as it passed me, I thought, can I grab it out? And then it snaked, it snaked back behind me, and I thought, I don't know. I thought maybe if I go in, if I grab some of the stuff and say I made a mistake, people won't look down on me. But I was so embarrassed that I decided not to do it. So what I decided instead to do was I went on my way home, I called the bank and I canceled the check. Yeah, there's a special place for me. And I remember the voice of the woman I called to cancel the check. And she's like, "Who is it made out to?" And I was like, a church? And she said, "That happens all the time." And I thought, but then I thought, well, at first I thought, good, and then I thought, man, that's really bad. But yeah, at the time, the sacrifice made no sense for me. Does that make sense? The sacrifice didn't make any sense. If you really sacrifice for God in any capacity in your life, whether it's with time or with your energy or with your money, there's gonna be a part of you that goes home feeling a little bit queasy. Sacrifice, there's a part of you that it doesn't make sense. And that's kind of what the disciples are feeling here. This woman is taking it a little bit too far. She's being a little dramatic, a little extreme. She's being a little bit over the top. The followers of Jesus, some of those disciples, they can't even imagine why someone would waste that amazing perfume on something like this. And Jesus is like, leave her alone. And then he explains, because it's a preparation for my burial. This type of radical sacrifice only makes sense within the context of the cross. What we do in the church really only makes sense within the context of the cross. The fact that you would spend one of your off days coming to service only makes sense within the context of the cross. The fact that you would give generously only makes sense within the context of the cross. The fact that you would be in a discipling time with somebody and you would confess some of the hardest things in your life so that you could get help to be a better man or woman only makes sense within the context of the cross. And see, what's happening here is that they are just a few days away from Jesus riding in on a donkey into Jerusalem, where people would drop palm fronds and they would be shouting out, Hosanna, and those Hosannas we know would be a prelude to crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. And we know this. We know that this woman's gift was only going to be, this window was only going to be available for a very short amount of time. We know that that's the case, and so sometimes we look at it like they know what was happening, but they don't really know what was going on. In fact, it's significant also that it was the Passover feast that they were about to be celebrating, because you know the story. The Israelites were rescued from Egypt with a mighty hand. And during some of those plagues, the very last plague, God instructed the children of Israel to sacrifice a lamb. And after they sacrificed that lamb, they would put the blood over the doorpost, and God would pass over his judgment on that house. He would pass over that house, and that's the dinner they're going to celebrate there in a few days. They're celebrating the Passover, but they don't see it. She sees it, but they don't see it. What they are celebrating, what the blood on the doorpost signified, the idea of God's salvation was actually sitting at the table with them. He was the Passover lamb. He was the Passover lamb. They didn't see it, but she did. She understood it because, again, this type of sacrifice only makes sense within the context of the cross. God had, in a way, passed over judgment on her. She knew that Jesus was going to pass over for the sins that she had committed. And so the least she thought, I'm assuming, the least she could do was break a vase for him. It may not have made sense to anybody else, but it made sense to her. Sacrifice makes sense when you consider the sacrifice that God has made for you. You know, what doesn't make sense is that a spotless Lamb of God would give his lifeblood for a sinner like me. That doesn't make sense. What doesn't make sense is that God would welcome us into his kingdom even though we were his enemies. That doesn't make sense. What doesn't make sense is that God would forgive my sins and wash me as white as snow even when I am the worst of sinners. What doesn't make sense is that there would be no condemnation even though you did nothing to earn it. And so when we think about the fact that sacrifice doesn't make sense, we have to also realize that maybe our sacrifice makes a lot of sense. And the sacrifice that Jesus did for us really made very little sense at all. Even though I was a liar, and I was a cheater, and I was an abuser, and I used him, and I used God's grace, and I broke God's word, and that doesn't make sense. That God would sacrifice his best for those who treated him the worst. How prideful am I to believe that giving to God doesn't make sense when God gave everything to me? Sometimes I just get too comfortable. It's a reminder of those people reclining at the table. I feel like I recline at the table. I feel like I belong there. I belonged here. Here's this woman doing a radical thing. What do you, get out of here. All snooty, snarky. I feel like I've done it already. I've already put in my work to be accepted by God, and here's this person doing this stuff. There's that Pharisee attitude. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, all of us have felt it. You think, I'm healed now. I don't have to break a vase anymore. I used to sacrifice a lot. Now it's time for the young people to sacrifice. I broke a lot of vases in my day. Now it's time for the young people to sacrifice. And young people, it is time for you to sacrifice. But we can never get to a place where we believe that we've arrived, that we've done enough work to repay the sacrifice that God has made for us. No. Every chance I get, I should be breaking a vase for God. And I'm not just talking about giving your money. I'm talking about giving everything. I'm talking about giving your life for Christ. You go, no, that's too intense for me. When we see an opportunity to give, we scoff at it, we snicker. But if we really remembered what we were saved from, I think we would have a heart to give back to God. It makes sense to give to him if you remember that you were saved. I love the characters in this story because you can look at these characters and you can understand why they would give. See, she didn't wake up that morning and just decide to break a vase worth a year's wages for no reason at all. She didn't decide to break a vase for no reason at all. Actually, John chapter 12 tells us a little bit more about this woman. We're going to read in verse 1 there. It says, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany. This is the same party, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. You can read that one chapter before in John chapter 11. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took a pint of pure nard, a very expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of her perfume. This is the same story, just in a different account, but it gives us a new perspective on who this woman is. So now we know it's Simon the leper's house. We already knew that. But volunteering at the party is the Lazarus family. In John chapter 11, we learn that Lazarus was dead, and Jesus walked in and called him out. He was dead for 3 days and called him out of the tomb. And so the whole family is kind of volunteering. It's an amazing miracle. You not only have the healing of Simon the leper in that house, but it really is a house of miracles with Lazarus there. The disease had taken everything from Simon the leper. Lazarus' life was taken from him, and Jesus gave them everything back. And there you have Martha cooking a meal, Lazarus hanging with Jesus, and the woman who busts into the house is none other than Mary, the sister of Lazarus. See, she was giving from experience. She was giving because she knows that God had given her something great. She was giving with the understanding of what God had given her. And for me, I think about my life and I think about all God has given me. I think about the fact that he has set me free. And really the idea of giving should not be very foreign to me, knowing that God has given me everything. I would be nothing without Jesus. I wouldn't have my brother, Mary says, without Jesus. And so, of course, I'm going to break the most expensive jar of perfume I could possibly find. See, if I'm Simon the leper, I would lend my house every single day for a party for Jesus. If I got my life back, I would lend my house every day. If I was given my life back like Lazarus was, I would give my life for Christ. If I was given my brother back, I would pour perfume. Does that make sense? Like, she had experience that lent to her giving. Because without Jesus, her brother is still dead. Without Jesus, Simon the leper is still diseased. Without Jesus, Lazarus is still in the grave. They were giving by experience. And I wonder, does your giving show the experience that God has done in your life? Does your giving show that God has saved you? Or do you give like somebody who was a really good person, and then God just sort of added on to your goodness? Do you give like somebody who's, your life was wonderful and awesome and special, and you just added a little bit of Christianity to your life? Or do you give like somebody who has been set free from the gates of hell and now has a chance to live with God forever? And again, I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about living all in for Christ. I'm talking about having an attitude that says, everything I have is Jesus's. My whole life is Christ. Do you give that way, or do you give like you've already received it all? She understood that if she put that perfume on herself, that it would fade. But if she put it on Christ, it would last forever. It could never be taken away. I bet you that if we asked Mary today, she would tell you that wasn't a sacrifice at all. That's a sacrifice. We're calling it a sacrifice, but she's like, that wasn't a sacrifice. The sacrifice happened a couple of days later when Jesus was killed. That was a sacrifice. She was able to understand the grace of giving because she understood grace. She understood what she was saved from. And so I want to ask you another question. Have you ever really broken a vase for God? Have you ever broken a vase? Again, I'm going to keep on clarifying. I'm not talking just about your money. Really, you could get up and drop thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and you still might have not broken a vase for God. Because where your heart really is in your time. And where your heart really is in sharing your faith with people. You're afraid. I want you to think about it. Have you ever really broken a vase for God? If you're younger, if you're 20 or 30, if you're a new Christian, there are lots of stories in this congregation of people who have done some amazing things giving to God. People who went a whole summer without air condition and gave that to special offering. People who sold cars and jewelry and equipment and houses and all these things so they could give to God. They broke lots of vases. If you're younger, though, have you ever done it? If you're a teen, have you ever done anything radical for God? Have you ever done anything? If you're a campus student, have you ever done anything radical for God? Truly radical for God? I think it's time for us to realize what we have been given. To realize what we have been giving, what we have been saved from. That we have been saved from hell, death, and the grave. And because of that, we give freely. In a moment, we're going to take our special offering. We're going to come up. Some people are going to come up and drop funds into a basket. And again, that's not all I'm talking about today. I'm going to keep on clarifying. But I want you to think about this. Have you ever broken a vase? And do you give like you have been given to?